Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all. So you and I have habits, don't we? Some best left unsaid. But the ones that I'm going to talk about are conversational habits. We have habits about what we choose to say and speak up about, and what we choose to not say. And we have habits about who we listen to, and habits around who we discount, whose voices we discount. And these habits then are created in teams, and they're created in organizations as well. I call them conversational habits. And they matter. They have consequences. So some of those organizations up there have habits of conversation where it's not okay to speak up. It hasn't been okay to say certain things. And in the survey that we've been running just recently, we know about 8% of our respondents, 8% of employees, currently know something that could harm their organization, and they haven't said anything about it yet. So that's one kind of habit of conversation. Another kind of habit of conversation that's up there with some of those images is the habit that it's okay to stick your hand up and say, I've got a crazy idea. And that idea is then listened to. And we also know from our survey that about 75% of respondents believe that they have an idea that could really assist their organization. Whether they actually say it or not depends on the habits within their teams and within their organizations. And for the past few years, we've been exploring and investigating what are the fundamental things that affect whether we choose to say something or not, whether we choose to listen or not. And obviously, because I'm from a business school, we've come up with a mnemonic, a framework that identifies 5 of these really fundamental things. So if you're going to speak up or listen up, firstly, trust. You have to trust in the value of your own opinion, and you have to trust in the value of other people's opinion if you're going to listen to them. And risk is enormously important in speaking up. Our perceptions of the consequences of what will happen if we say something. And are we aware of the risks that other people perceive in speaking up to us? We know that 2 of the things that stop people speaking up the most are fear of upsetting others and fear of being perceived negatively. We also know that the more senior you are, the more likely you are to be rather optimistic, or one could say deluded, as to whether other people are speaking up to you. Yeah, you tend to be blind to the risks that other people face in speaking up to you. And when we're speaking up and listening up, both of those things are political acts. Yeah? Speaking up and listening up affects power, it affects status and authority. So understanding is about that political environment. And one way we figure out politics is we examine the titles that we give ourselves and the titles that we give other people, and labels. So as I kind of hurried my way up onto stage just now, you may or may not have been consciously labeling me. You did label me, whether you knew it or not. Gender, nationality, age, appearance. So the titles and labels we put on one another affect whether we feel okay to say something, and they affect who we think is worth listening to. That's titles. And then how to is all about the skills that we bring to bear in inviting other people to speak up, and the skills that we have in actually speaking up ourselves. So our choices around speaking up and listening up tend to navigate some of those things. And you know, we've learnt to navigate the truth framework through centuries of face-to-face communication, reading signals, understanding one another face to face. And guess what? Some of that is now changing radically, unlike ever before. So we have virtual platforms, we have technology, we have data at our fingertips. That's affecting the way we navigate that truth framework. It's going to affect, it is affecting, whether and how we speak up and whose voices count and whose voices are listened to. And key to that is our access and engagement with data, and also our discernment. Can we figure out what data to trust? And what's real, what's fake? And we've been exploring that. It's part of a book that we have written, which is out in July. And I'm going to take from that book 3 scenarios to kind of bring this to life somewhat. How does our technological world affect the way that we speak and listen up? So here's scenario 1. Picture the scene. You're in your virtual boardroom. Yourself, your colleagues have smart glasses, contact lenses, personal devices right here. And they are giving you unprecedented access to data. Suddenly, you can see the emotional state of your colleagues. You can tell who's confident, you can tell who's anxious. You have linguistic analysis at your fingertips. You can see who's had the airtime, who's spoken more than other people. Who, when they say something, affects what then happens. You might be able to read the balance between advocacy and inquiry in the meeting. You might be able to tell on your personal device might tell you, do you realize you haven't even asked a question so far in this meeting and it's lasted 2 hours so far? Yeah. So all this data gives us the potential to meet, learn, listen, speak, care about one another in amazing ways. And it depends on our intent. So the same data might be used by the more powerful to make sure that there is fear and compliance going on in the meeting. Or that data could be used in really skillful ways so that people don't want to be kind of unconsciously powerful. They want to bring in different voices and know that they might be blind to that. So they might use data in a way that really helps voice. Who knows? That's one scenario. How do you think you'd use that data? How do you think your leadership teams would use that data? Here's scenario 2. So, picture the scene. Everything you say, or nearly everything you say and do in your organization is recorded. It's logged. It's in the public domain, far more than it ever has been before. And various algorithms track what you're saying and how you say it and who you say it to. And something kind of a little bit akin to a sort of social credit scoring is going on. What you say is tracked and analyzed and compared to company values. We care about this. Are people saying stuff that goes along with this? So finally, HR manages to get everybody, as we say in the UK, singing from the same hymn sheet. Everyone is aligned to the company values. They're talking in a way that aligns to the company values, or are they? Politics, perhaps, here has just gone online. Our algorithms, our apps, are telling us which forums should we be on. If we're savvy, Where should we be seen to say what in order to be rated in a certain way? Yeah? How do we maneuver that? So our tech, our devices might enable us to do that extremely skillfully and very politically. Okay. As the dark web of communication also emerges, where we feel perhaps a little bit more free of what to say outside of the boundaries of our organizational life. So that's another scenario. And you may think that's more or less likely to happen. Third scenario. So we have unprecedented access to data, data limitless, but our human capacity to assimilate that data and to discern and reflect upon that data is limited. So we have loads of access to it. We then have a choice of how much attention to pay to it. So in this scenario, you have some colleagues who are mesmerized by their devices, very possibly addicted to them, looking at that data because they trust that data more than this data, potentially. And with those people, trusting this sort of data may mean that our interactions become a little bit more transactional, a little bit more instrumental. You have other colleagues who are navigating that balance and trying to use data in order to improve the way that we connect as human beings. You may have other colleagues who have decided to step off of the technological fan club altogether. Who knows? How would you use that data? Again, how do you think you would use that data? Just another scenario that may or may not emerge. It already is in some ways. But here's the point. Data and our access to information is altering the way that we choose to speak and to listen. And it's altering the way that we navigate the truth framework. So, for example, with trust, what data do you trust? Do you trust your devices, or do you trust embodied, intuitive, experiential knowledge? How do you balance those two things? Do you feel more confident in voicing your opinion because you have access to data that you've never had before? Or do you get actually quite a lot more confused because there's so much data that you speak up less? In terms of listening and trusting other perspectives and opinions, do you tend to hone in and trust the voices that are like your own? And we've seen that a little bit on social media platforms. It's a form of confirmation bias. We tune into voices that sound like our own. You know, will somehow we manage to kind of open up and listen to diverse perspectives? So trust is going to be impacted. Risk is going to be impacted. Who knows how? It might be that our ability to connect with people gives us a kind of collective power, a power to tune into other people that want to speak up about the same sorts of things. A great example of this is the Me Too campaign. That collective power may make it feel less risky around speaking up. However, most of what we say perhaps is still in the public domain, and that may make it feel even more risky. Who knows? Understanding, so politics is still around, you know? It just moves on to different forums. So how we understand power and status and authority is still there. It's just across different formats and different forums, as we saw in the gaming the algorithm scenario. And titles. Will different titles convey different meanings? So who knows? Perhaps, you know, when I was a management consultant, when I first started work in my 20s, my manager once said to me, "Megan, there's a bit of a problem. When you walk into the boardroom, you're labeled young and woman, which doesn't scream status and authority." But maybe in the more tech, digital world, that label, young, may start to convey different things. Maybe those with access to data and understanding data will find that their voice becomes much more important, will have much more authority. So we will alter the way that we place status and power on different sorts of titles. And then, of course, the how-to is clearly going to be affected. How will we influence across different forms, different forums? How will we do that skillfully? And again, our access to data and our discernment of that are really, really important there. So here's the points here. Speaking up and listening up are personal imperatives, and they're also organizational imperatives. So what you say and who you listen to every day, including today, influences the perception that you have of yourself. It influences whether you're proud of yourself or ashamed of yourself. These decisions and choices matter. They certainly matter at organizational levels. They're the difference sometimes between whether an organization survives or falls over. Habits of conversation. So those are imperatives with AI, with AR, with tech, knowledge about ourselves and each other, and our relationships is likely to become much more visible in some ways. So what's that going to mean? There's the potential to really improve the way that we communicate and connect with one another. You know, we could really use the data out there and the tech out there to improve the way that we understand, influence, and care for one another. And there's the potential that it might not be used that way. There's the potential that it could be used far more carelessly than that, and that has consequences. So ongoing mindful conversations about our use of tech and how it affects how we relate is absolutely fundamental. And what I sometimes see is a rush to take up tech, but without the reflective conversation that needs to go with it. Consequences. Whose voice is now being heard more than others? And how are we enabling people to speak up about the things that they really need to? So what my request is that we continue that reflective conversation alongside taking up some of this technology. And here's where we place our research within this book, which is coming out later on. So with today and with tomorrow, as you listen to the potential of all of these applications in HR, will you please also hold the question, how will this influence and impact power, status, and authority, who gets heard and who doesn't get heard? Because if you're looking to alter organizational change in any way, who says what to whom and who gets listened to matters. Thank you.